Exactly 10 days ago, the wall of my bedroom began to hum with a pattern of light that rewrote my financial map. It was not a light you could name. It moved like a language, folding into geometric scripts and whispering hints about the matrix of abundance. My thinking widened in a single breath. 7 days later, my bank balance showed 1 million, as if from nowhere. If I tell you the true law of prosperity is not human, but a forbidden technology they hide from us, will you hear me? Something unseen had just begun to look back at me. I was 48 and worn thin. My marriage of 15 years with Gabrielle had ended. She left with our daughter and the parts of my life I had believed were secure. The apartment payments had slipped 3 months. The bank's notices arrived like small, authoritative doors slamming shut. My consultancy, once a quiet pride, listed under a pile of unpaid invoices. Debts hovered at about 380,000. Numbers that landed like weights in my chest. I woke at 4 each morning. The room tasted of stale coffee and old paint. The ceiling peeled in pale strips. My palms sweated before the first light. I had the same dream every night. Red stamped invoices stacked like tombstones. I learned to hold my breath when the intercom clicked. I learned to avoid the lobby because the echo there sounded like someone reading my failures aloud. My father's voice lived in my head. "Money doesn't grow on trees, George," he'd say. I repeated it like a prayer I didn't choose. I tried everything to break the pattern. Investment courses with glossy slides, guided meditations that promised miracles, abundance rituals with candles and lists. Each method arrived with soft hope and left with the same muted disappointment. The rituals felt like dressing a wound without feeling the pain beneath. My body kept score. My chest stayed tight. My breath came shallow and fast. I had an autopilot of scarcity, a dozen micro habits that proved the same story. I counted coins in a purse I hadn't used. I rechecked the same email thread 5 times. I declined calls when I saw unknown numbers. These small acts meandered into a life that convinced me lack was my identity. Then came the notice. A Tuesday, gray and ordinary, a sealed envelope with a deadline, 10 days to vacate. I remember the paper's thickness. I remember the way the light through the balcony glass looked brittle, like thin ice. I sat on the balcony and watched the city continue without me. Cars flowed. A child laughed 2 blocks away. Nothing matched the internal hush. I had hit the bottom. And then, a reflection. A thin band of light on the opposite building's window that caught my eye. It moved with an odd intention. For a moment it felt like being observed. My skin prickled. I turned my head and met the small, impossible pulse again. A small, private sign. I carried that glance like a seed of curiosity. I began to detail the scene to myself, as if by naming I could make sense of the absurd. The light was colder than the sunset. It had edges that hinted at shapes I could not hold. It did not belong to any lamp or car. It felt like a question thrown through glass. You who are listening now, thank you for being here. I make these videos because the channel is young and real stories need space to breathe. If this story touches something in you, subscribe. It helps us reach the first 1,000. Write your city and country below. I read every comment. Your presence matters more than the numbers. Still, curiosity does not erase fear. I felt an odd mix of dread and hunger. Part of me wanted to laugh it off. The other part leaned forward, as if toward a cliff that might be a door. I kept the light in my mind like a tiny map. I remember the first concrete image I could not explain. A memory of my grandfather's coined silver, worn, with a nick on one side. I had lost it decades ago. I could feel its cool edge in my palm, as real in memory as the balcony's paint. My doubt whispered, "You must have put it somewhere." My chest tightened at the thought of being ridiculous. My life had become a test of belief and hesitation. I lived in this double bind, the severe logic of my training as a consultant and the thin, bright hunger of something entirely different, calling from the margins. I told myself a short phrase, again and again, like a loop to keep steady. I am not my debt. I am not my debt. I am not my debt. That loop became a small ritual. I spoke it under my breath while making coffee. I said it as I opened my accounts. I said it when the bell at the door sounded. Each repetition offered the tiniest space where doubt could be met by something else, a softer, steadier voice inside me. The nights grew tighter. The city's noise became a distant tide. I slept less. And then, on a night that had no announcement, the air in my bedroom shifted. It felt like the first true change, not dramatic at once, but a subtle turning, like river water finding a new path. I woke to a metallic hum, low and steady, like a machine tuned to a tone I had never heard. I stood up. The apartment smelled faintly of ozone and rain. I saw nothing at first. Then, in the corner of the room, the light began to move. It pulsed in geometric sequences, triangles, then hexagons, then meshes that folded into themselves. The patterns were patient and precise, like someone writing with a wrist I could not see. My hair rose. My skin felt thin. The clock on the bedside table blinked and then stopped. The mechanical tick that had been the background rhythm of my life went quiet. Outside, the city's sound seemed to hold its breath. I understood then that what came next would not be measured in the same currency as my bank statements. Something else was accounting for me. Mini cliffhanger. I will tell you what spoke to me in that light. It was not a voice you hear, it was a presence that read the shape of my doubt. What it said changed the rules I had lived by. It was past midnight. The air felt thicker near the window, like someone had poured syrup into the room's atmosphere. The light had been there for a few minutes, a slow, patient breathing of bluish silver. Then the blue folded inward and took form. Not a body, exactly. More a geometry that suggested a body. A lattice of points, each that a tiny star joined by lines of soft flame. The figure stretched slightly, taller than me, proportioned in a way that felt intentionally human and deliberately not. It did not step, it unfolded. The floor did not creak. The apartment did not rearrange itself. The shape simply inhabited the corner as if it had always been allowed there. You don't have to believe me. I would have been the same skeptic if our roles were reversed. But facts live in the body first. My heart galloped. My breath shortened. My skin broke into that electric chill that lives somewhere between fear and wonder. Then I heard it. Not through my ears. The words arrived in my head clear, ripe, like a bell struck underwater. The voice had texture, ancient and patient, like someone who had watched many small lives bloom and wither. You do not need to fear, it said. The tone was not commanding. It was an invitation to breathe. I tried to say a name. My mouth made a sound, hoarse and small. Who? What are you? I am Zarak. The answer slipped into my mind, and with the name came an impression of distant stars and quiet observatories. An observer. Your species confuses law for limit. The casual cruelty of the phrase landed like a cool hand on my spine. He or that configuration calling itself Zarak shifted closer without moving. Symbols traced in light across its chest like a slow, deliberate diagram. Each sigil hummed a note. The air tasted faintly metallic, like a penny warmed in the sun. Create with recognition, it said. Not with asking. I remember how my whole body betrayed me then. I wanted to argue. I wanted to catalog this as stress, sleep deprivation, the mind's final negotiation with despair. I thought, logic will protect me. Logic is currency. But the voice had an immediacy that my reasoning could not intercept. Do you mean I should ask the universe for money? I said. My voice trembled. The word, money, sounded vulgar in that room of geometry. Zarak's light pulsed, soft and amused. You ask for what you want. You create from what you recognize. There is a difference. Recognition rearranges the medium. His words felt like a puzzle, missing one crucial piece. The pressure in the room increased by a fraction of a degree. My hair stood where the skin tightened at the base of my neck. Time felt as if it were folded between pages. He did something then I did not expect. He reached with what would be hands and opened the air between us like a screen. On that screen I saw my thoughts rend. 3 hours later, when I reached for a book on the shelf, something knocked against the floor and rolled toward my foot. A metallic clink. My fingers closed on the cold circle I had thought only of. The coin lay there, as real as the wood under it, the nick exactly where memory had held it. I did not have language for the shaking that followed. My voice collapsed into a wet laugh that was almost a sob. The coin had been lost for 30 years. It should have stayed lost. And yet there it was, proof taped to the skin of my world. "This is only a beginning," Zarak said. His words were already retreating like a tide. "You define reality by what you allow to exist as true." I felt different after that tiny miracle. Not clearer, that would be too tidy, but opened. A new aperture in my chest let in a light that did not come from lamps or numbers. Curiosity arrived like a hunger that finally named itself. The next night he returned. The light filled the apartment and made the dust look like galaxies. He spoke of states and bridges. "Your world exists as possibility and as form," he said. "The bridge is emotional certainty." He asked me to try something that went against every instinct I'd learned as a consultant. "Do not ask for the money," he instructed. "Declare it solved. Feel gratitude as if the debt is already folded into something else." It felt like insanity. How could gratitude be a verb of payment? How could emotion be a ledger? Still, the image of the coin had rearranged my caution. I prepared a small ritual. I turned off my phone. I put a single candle in the center of the room. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands warm on my knees. I breathed until the chest loosened. I imagined opening an envelope with 10,000 reais, not like a wish, but like recollection. I let my fingers feel the crispness of the notes, the slight curl at the corners. I smelled the paper. I allowed a fierce, absurd gratitude to rise in my chest, as if the money had already arrived. Gratitude swelled and made the room tilt in a way I can only call honest. "Do not force," Zarak intoned. "Allow." I sat in that state for 20 minutes. When the silence became thick and comfortable, I opened my eyes. The candle flickered as if in applause. The next day my phone rang. A client I had not heard from in nearly 2 years wanted help on an urgent project. He offered an advance. Exactly 10,000 reais. I remember the sound of his voice on the line, and the way my hands slipped as if the earth under them had settled into a new shape. I laughed out loud, because there was no other sound fit for that moment. I went to my brother Edward then. I wanted to bring this hope into ordinary life. I wanted to share the coin and the client and the thing I could not explain. I met him in a cafe under a street lamp that smelled of rain. I told him everything: the light, the voice, the coin, the envelope. At first his face moved through curiosity and worry. Then the old, familiar fold of condescension. "You need to see a therapist, George," he said. He leaned back, glasses catching the lamp's gleam. "Stress does things to a man. You've been underwater." His words hit like a closed door. The man I loved for his steadiness closed that small opening with the weight of certainty. I felt a flash of humiliation, and then a raw, hot solitude. If the people closest to me could not hold what I was becoming, what ground did I have? When I went home that night, the room felt smaller. The light that evening was dimmer. I told Zarak what had happened. "They will not believe," I said. "How can I practice something everyone calls madness?" Zarak's response was soft and strange. "Most are trained to disbelieve the extraordinary," he said. "Cynicism is a shield. The shield keeps the possibility from being contaminated. Your task is not to convince. It is to demonstrate." The sentence settled in me like a cold stone planted into soil. Demonstrate. Not preach. Not argue. Demonstrate. I found myself repeating another short loop in my head, an internal engine. I create by recognition. I create by recognition. I create by recognition. The phrase felt different from the earlier loops. It carried a seed of action. It warmed the place behind my sternum. The stakes moved then. My eviction days counted down. My debts were not abstract anymore. They were a pressure that would erase my apartment and possibly my chance at seeing my daughter on weekends. The lesson could not remain an intellectual curiosity. It had to become a conduct. So I prepared for the leap not with spreadsheets, but with the posture of someone choosing to stir the current. I cleared the small table. I placed the candle. I turned inward and spoke the words aloud until they felt like a skin on me. I am abundance. I am abundance. I am abundance. I do not say that with arrogance. I say it with the weary humility of a man who has been taught scarcity like a classroom lesson and now chooses to unlearn it. The gesture was both private and defiant. Mini cliffhanger. I will tell you precisely what I did when the clock nearly ran out. The next move would not be small. It would ask everything I held about certainty and identity. The corner of the room changed like a page turning. The air folded in a way I could feel against my skin, a slight pressure, a cool that sat behind my sternum. The light did not arrive. It uncurled. Points of silver blue threaded themselves into a lattice and then, impossibly, into a torso. The sound in the room was not a sound, but a geometry, a subtle, metallic ringing that shaped itself around thought. My breath shortened. My hands found the edge of the mattress and gripped as if to anchor a body I barely trusted. Zarak did not speak aloud. His presence pressed words into the hollow behind my eyes. They were short, not a lecture. Recognition changes the medium, he sent. The pattern on his chest rearranged into tiny sigils that hummed like tuned glass. The light mapped my inhalations. I felt the room like the inside of a shell, closed, resonant, alive. He opened a space between us like someone sliding a window. On that window, my mind played back its private film. Fear came first, jagged red shards that clattered like coin on tile. Shame pooled black at the hem of the images. Hope, a thin blue thread, trembled and tried to stitch them together. I watched without flinching, because watching itself felt like the first honest movement I had made in months. You think thoughts are refunds, Zarak said. The phrase arrived gentle and precise. They are protocols. They instruct. I felt those words settle into the soft bone of my chest like a small stone. If thoughts were instruction sets, then my daily habits were a code base that had been running the same bug for years. He asked for a proof. Not grand. Not theatrical. Choose the smallest missing thing you will not miss, he suggested. The suggestion was a finger pointing at my own life. My mind reached before I could stop it. The coin my grandfather had given me, silver, nicked, a crescent scar along its edge rose like a small ghost in my palms. Zarak's lattice brightened. A single column of light unfurled and touched the imagined coin like a pointer confirming a selection. Send recognition as if retrieving memory. Do not demand. Recall, he instructed. The difference in tone was tiny and enormous. Demand held desperation. Recognition held ownership. I did what I was told. I closed my eyes and felt the coin's rim on my fingertip. I remembered the weight, the cold that seemed to eat the heat of my skin. I breathed until the tightness in my chest thinned. I repeated a small phrase aloud because my mouth needed form. I accept what I remember as already here. The words were simple. They did not promise a miracle. They only aligned a muscle inside me that had forgotten how to hold possibility. 3 hours later, the house made a small sound like metal finding wood. I reached for a book and something dropped at my foot. The coin rolled with a sound I have since replayed 1,000 times, bright, real, undeniable. My fingers closed around the cold rim, and for a second my rational mind fought like a cough at the back of my throat. 30 years of absence should have been longer than this. Yet there it was, the nick exactly where memory had held it. When the laugh came out of me, it was wet and accidental. Laughter and sobness braided together. The coin in my palm felt like a contract signed with silence. Here is proof, if you will accept it. Zarak's light softened. This is not magic that cheats, he said. This is recognition that calls form. You defined it as real. It answered. I slept poorly that night, but with a new kind of unrest. Not the gnawing emptiness that had been my nightly companion, but a curiosity that hummed like resonance. The little experiment had shifted something in me. You must reclaim what you have the courage to hold as true. I learned to keep attention like a small flame. The world answered not to the loudness of my asking, but to the clarity of my acceptance. The first revelation had given me a method and a responsibility. I could no longer pretend that my habitual small griefs were passive. They were instructions I replayed, coded, and executed day after day. Soon a new question arrived at the edge of my quiet like a knock without hands. If recognition could return a coin and call a client, what could it do to a debt? The question had teeth. I fed it with the smallest, truest intention I could craft. The stakes rose like tide. Mini cliffhanger. I will show you the exact exercise he asked me to perform next to practice that felt like theft and prayer at the same time. It would move the experiment from small proofs to an urgent test. The instruction for the next night was precise and simple. Prepare the space. Remove noise. Light a single candle. Sit with palms open as if holding a hollow. Breathe until the chest loosens. Imagine not an absence, but a past tense receipt. You already have what is owed. The action read like a small liturgy. I swept the table. The apartment smelled of old paper and cold coffee. The candle added a lemon edge that softened the dust. I set an envelope in front of me because my body needed an object to cradle the image. The object needed to be ordinary. The ordinary held better than theatrics. Zarak's light braided faintly above the envelope like a halo. Do not ask, he said. Declare and feel. Memory precedes manifest. He did not ask me to chant numbers. He asked for likeness, texture, weight, volume of feeling. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to recall the sensation of a crisp stack of notes, the tiny rasp of new paper, the subtle warmth when you press bills together. I let gratitude move through me as if turning pages of a beloved book. For the practice, he suggested a small target, 10,000 reais. Not because the number mattered, but because specificity anchors recognition. I pictured the envelope again, fingers trembling now not from fear, but from something like reverence. I let gratitude rise until it felt full enough to fill the apartment. I sat like that for 20 minutes. My throat tightened. Tears came without drama. I repeated a new loop in my head, one I had not used before. I recall, I receive, I return. I recall, I receive, I return. The cadence steadied me. The repetition folded the practice into a ritual that moved beyond hope and into habit. The next day the phone rang with an ordinary urgency. A voice I had not heard in 2 years asked if I was available. A project needed immediate help. The caller offered in advance 10,000 reais. I remember the sound of the number spoken. It hit the room like a concrete tile dropping into a pond. My hands went numb. It was the same figure I'd imagined, the same envelope I had held in my mind. There was no trumpeted revelation, only confirmation. The world matched the memory. The client's payment arrived that afternoon. My bank notification buzzed like a small, practical miracle. I sat on the couch and laughed, a raw and private sound. It was not the million that would come later. It was a test passed by the exact degree Zarak had prescribed. Emboldened, I tried the practice again with other small targets. I asked, internally and gently, for an overdue invoice to be returned. I pictured the email subject line, the relief as the number hit the account. 2 days later, a long dormant client sent a note that resolved to payment. I sat with my palm on the screen and felt a tremor travel up my arm, as if the device were alive to the pressure of certainty. Not every attempt yielded immediate fruit. I learned to keep a ledger of signs rather than results. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes something unrelated shifted. A neighbor offered me a ride. A stranger returned a lost receipt. The pattern emerged. Recognition rearranged the field. The field replied in kind, sometimes in currency, sometimes in gesture. The medium was generous in its forms. I also practiced recognition in small, non-financial places, because Zarak had warned that prosperity often arrives as a reweaving of small threads. I sat with my sister's broken radio on my lap, feeling the plastic under my fingers, remembering the way her laugh used to come through that speaker. I allowed gratitude for the sound to rise as if it had already been heard. The next morning, the radio spontaneously played a clear station that had not existed on its dial the day before. It was not medicine. It was possibility rearranged. Through these exercises, I created a new internal architecture. Where scarcity had once built rooms with barred windows, I began to open spaces. Each practice required the same posture: preparation of senses, intentional recall, sustained gratitude, gentle release. The movement was simple and stubborn. It looked like everyday devotion. My inner critic did not vanish. It stayed at the margins like a moody roommate. Some mornings I woke and felt foolish. My brother's voice echoed in my head, the word delusion repeated in his cadence. But there was now a second voice, quieter and steadier, that said, demonstrate. Demonstrate until the evidence stacks in a way that cannot be flattened by ridicule. I invented small checks. I kept receipts, emails, physical objects in a shoebox. The box became a shrine of sorts, a pragmatic altar. The coin rested on top of the envelope I had used during the 10,000 practice. Every time doubt tried to stage a coup, I opened the box and let the tangible proof speak. The loop I took to bed in those nights changed slightly. I hold the true, therefore the true holds me. I hold the true, therefore the true holds me. It sounded pompous in the morning light and essential at midnight. The phrase trained my attention not to plead, but to inhabit. As the days shortened, a new tension arrived from outside my room. I had made the mistake of telling someone close, believing intimacy might be shelter. The conversation did not land as I had hoped. My brother Edward met the story with a facial shrug and practical skepticism that felt like a physical shove. I left that cafe carrying the weight of his doubt the way one carries wet clothing, heavy and cold. When I told Zarak, the light around him did not harden. Most are trained against the extraordinary, he acknowledged. Skepticism preserves structure. Your work is not to dismantle their armor, but to inhabit a different frequency until the proof is in plain sight. I understood then that the path forward was not persuasion. It was escalation not of noise, but of consequence. The experiments that had once been gentle would need to scale. The stakes would rise. The debt on my account would not be paid with small tokens. It demanded a demonstration of a different order. Mini cliffhanger. I prepared then, with a steadiness both foolish and deliberate, to do what I had been taught, to declare a state so complete that it would either hold or break me. The next attempt would not be small. Edward washed my hands as if he could read the tremor of the future in the way I fidgeted the cup. The cafe steamed around us. Coffee smelled like rain and coal. He folded his hands into a measured shape and said the words with the gentle cruelty of a man who keeps his life in order. You should get help, George. Stress rewires the mind. People break under this. His voice was a scalpel. It was brief. It was meant to cut clean. I felt the old shame rise, the familiar architecture of failure. For a moment, I wanted to fold into the shape of his certainty, to accept that I had imagined the coin, that the client was coincidence, that the whole thing was a cognitive echo. I wanted the safety of being explainable. Instead, I held something else. I remembered the coin's cold rim. I remembered the weight of the envelope in the candlelight. I felt, physically, the slight loosening in my chest that had arrived the night I declared 10,000 as memory. The body retained proofs my brother's words could not reach. I understand your worry, I said. My voice felt clearer when spoken than it had in my head. I'm not asking you to agree. I'm not asking you to see. I'm telling you what I'm doing because I owe you honesty. He softened, a fraction. Concern wavered into caregiving and then snapped back into professional caution. Honesty is a good thing, he replied. But don't lose yourself fishing for miracles. We left the cafe with the city bright and indifferent. The exchange remained lodged like a needle. If Edward could not hold this with me, who could? If the people I loved called the thing madness, would the thing itself dim in response? If I could sustain that identity long enough, my life would have to rearrange to accommodate it. The move required sacrifice. It asked me to put reputation and predictability on the line. I began to prepare in practical ways I had not considered. I made lists, not of numbers, but of vulnerabilities. What could I lose if I failed? The apartment, the little social niceties, the easy listening of family assumptions. I listed them because naming the cost focused the mind. It made the leap less romantic and more tactical. At night, I rehearsed new phrases. They were short, direct, and felt like keys. I spoke them until the sound of them matched the shape inside my chest. One quietly became my anchor. I am source, not supplicant. I am source, not supplicant. The loop steadied a tremor in my hands and made my jaw unclench. It mattered that the words had the precise tone of someone taking responsibility rather than seeking mercy. Small realignments followed. I started returning calls I'd avoided. I renegotiated terms with vendors and spoke plainly about timelines. Where I could be firm, I was. Where I needed help, I asked. The old reflex of shame hide, minimize, apologize cracked. In its place, I practiced clear boundary and measured gratitude. The world responded in small, sometimes bureaucratic ways. Payments processed faster, conversations that had stalled resumed with momentum. A neighbor, Marta, who had once dismissed my ideas with a quick smile, knocked on my door one afternoon with a flyer in her hand. She had attended a local meeting where a small fund was distributing micro-grants to neighborhood businesses. She asked if I might apply. Her eyes tested me. I felt the old habit of downplaying and then, with an odd new boldness, described in a few sentences the project I had shelved years ago. She left my apartment with a small, practical smile and a promise to help with the application. The changes were not blinding. They were bureaucratic, human, the kind of slow tectonics that move cities over time. But each small shift piled up into a visible slope. The practice of declaring, feeling, and acting created habits in my posture, in my conversation, in the cadence of decisions. People began to perceive a man who no longer flinched at the word no. Edward remained skeptical. He called sometimes, and our conversations were careful now, like two people handling fragile glass. He suggested therapy and offered books with tidy advice. I accepted a few sessions at his insistence not because I needed convincing of my sanity, but because I needed tools to hold the new identity without unraveling. Therapy became another instrument, not a contradiction. Between the practical moves and the private rituals, I prepared for the proof that would change everything. I would not only declare my debt solved, I would carry the posture of someone who had never known scarcity in their bones. It felt like walking onto a tightrope in the dark, except that I had a method and a small, steady voice in my head reminding me of the coin, the envelope, the paid advance. On the eve of the test, I cleared the apartment until the surfaces answered to the light. I put the coin in the center of the table with the small blue crystal Zarak had given me, though he hadn't yet materialized that object in front of me. I felt it as possibility. I sat for a long time and breathed until the world thinned to a point. The loop rose again, quiet and sure. I am source, not supplicant. Then I moved into the posture Zarak had taught with greater insistence. Action. I wrote an email I had avoided for months, a letter to a former partner, honest and without flinch. I prepared projections with confidence rather than apology. I reached out to a contact at a foreign firm whose name had hovered in my old files. I declared internally that the debt would be folded, not by luck, but by the integrity of my state. When I hit send on the last message, the apartment held its breath with me. The candlewick flashed tiny flames of hope. The night felt like an animal listening, patient and vast. Mini cliffhanger. In 3 days something will arrive that reframes the scale of what I had been calling possible. It will come as a formal offer, and it will demand a choice that will define who I have become. The night I decided to risk everything, the apartment felt both smaller and clearer. I wiped the table until the grain of the wood showed like a map. The candle I lit smelled of lemon and old paper. The flame threw a thin, honest light. My palms rested on the envelope I had placed there as a stand-in for outcome. My breath moved slow and close. The room was warm at the chest and cool at the skin. I listened to the hush between the street sounds as if it were an answer waiting to be read. I sat and placed a single phrase in my mouth like a coin. I did not ask. I declared, I hold abundance as fact. The words felt strange at first, then domestic. I visualized not an arrival, but a continuity money as a river I already stood inside. I named the exact figure that had been scaring me for weeks, and I felt gratitude fill the shape I made. The feeling had texture, heavy, like velvet, and bright, like a copper coin warmed in sunlight. My chest lifted. Tears slid down quietly, relief that sounded like a small instrument tuning. For 2 hours I rode that state. I repeated a short loop that had not existed before. I am the origin. Origin answers me. I am the origin. Origin answers me. The loop narrowed my mind like a lens. My hand stopped trembling. The candle flickered and steadied. I slept with the envelope beside my pillow and woke with the taste of salt and lemon in my mouth. When morning arrived, the city sounded unchanged, but something in the air felt authorized. 3 days later, the call came. The voice on the other end said the name of a multinational as if it had been obvious all along. They wanted the method I'd abandoned 10 years earlier. They offered a price I had not dared speak aloud. I felt the number like a bell in my bones. My phone hummed constantly. Each notification was a small hammer shaping the world. An email arrived with instructions for due diligence. The bank app blinked with a pending transfer. I touched the screen, and the digits were real and cold under my fingertip. Signing the contract was a ritual of a different sort. The paper smelled of printer ink and very clean paper. My signature felt like someone else's at first, then like mine. When the transfer confirmed, the sound my phone made seemed comic against the silence of the apartment. I sat on the floor and laughed until it loosened something in my sternum. I cried some more. The relief was not theatrical. It was a calibrating click inside the body, a lock that had closed, and, with it, a door that opened on another room. That night, I walked the rooms I had feared losing. The light from the street pooled across the floorboards like a map of possible steps. I touched the walls. I felt the home I had been told might disappear become thicker, more resistant. The proof was simple and bureaucratic: a file saved, a number in an account, but the change registered as a bodily amendment. I slept with the blue crystal on the table. It hummed faintly, or perhaps I had learned to hear what was always there. Mini cliffhanger. When the buyer called 2 days after the transfer, their tone shifted. They wanted not only the method, but access. They asked a question that would test the limits of what I had learned. Zarak came that night with light like wet glass. He did not occupy the corner of the room. He rearranged it. The air acquired a slow reverberation, like a long bell. He spoke in short sentences that landed as if they were small stones in a pond. "You have not learned to ask," he said. "You have learned to be." His voice felt like a blueprint unfolding. I asked him, plainly, why did the world obey when I ceased to plead? He smiled in a way that lit the pattern behind his eyes. "The code is simple and operational," he said. "Turn belief into posture. Turn posture into protocol. Turn protocol into language." He then articulated the rules not as a sermon, but as tools, and each tool had a handle I could grip. He taught me how to make the state repeatable. The method had 4 movements. First, prepare the sensorium: light, sound, smell, posture. Second, fix a concrete form: a figure, a document, an image with edges. Third, move feeling into memory: feel as if the form is already past tense. Fourth, release the declaration and return to ordinary action while preserving the internal posture. He said the last step mattered most: embodiment, not theatrics. He gave me phrases to speak aloud and to hold inside. They were not generic. They had an economy to them. One loop I kept and reshaped into a tool. I embody flow, or I visualized the muscle knitting differently, felt gratitude as if healing had already happened, and in a week the stiffness reduced enough for me to lift a box without the old recoil. Each result was modest, plausible, and yet impossible by the old logic. These are not miracles delivered, Zarak said. They are translations of state into event. He repeated, slowly, state precedes form. The phrase felt less like doctrine and more like a lever I could press. He asked me to write the code in 3 forms. The phrase to anchor me internally, a sentence to speak into space when action was needed, and a practical ritual to be performed once daily. My internal loop became, I hold origin. Origin moves in my life. My spoken sentence became, my work arrives whole and timely. My daily ritual was the 3-minute envelope act light, hold, release. He ended with a caveat about scaling. As the stake increases, so does friction, he warned. Systems aligned to scarcity will test the new architecture. Expect resistance. Visibility draws filters. It was a sober note. He did not promise ease. He promised precision. Mini cliffhanger. Before he left, the room dimmed and then brightened. He placed his hand, or the impression of hand, on my temple. The warmth carried a shape of code I had not yet read aloud. When Zarak prepared to leave, the room folded around his absence as if mourning and blessing at once. He hovered for a moment and then touched my forehead with a pressure that felt like change. The blue crystal materialized between my fingers as if I had always known where to find it. He called it the key of transmutation and said, "It is not a magic object. It is a reminder the body will obey." After he left, the rhythm of my days altered slowly and then fast. I paid the debts, yes, but more importantly, I redesigned my scheduling, my invoices, the language I used with partners. I stopped apologizing in business emails. I recalibrated fees and terms without shame and noticed contracts were simpler, conversations clearer. The world responded in patience and in expedience. People who had been obstacles became logistical points. The crystal sat on my desk. When sunlight struck it at certain angles, I could see faint patterns. I traced these with my thumb as a ritual. The ritual was small. 3 breaths, the phrase in my head, the envelope laid on the table for 1 minute. It took less time than coffee. It changed my posture. The practice became a hinge between the inner state and the outer day. My relationships shifted in ways that surprised me. Eduardo called less with worry and more with curiosity. He did not become a disciple. He became someone who measured evidence differently. My sister visited. She touched the radio and cried at the clarity of a voice that sounded younger. My neighbor Marta, who once dismissed me as a dreamer, invited me to speak at a community meeting. I accepted. The talk was practical and honest. People left with tools, not promises. They tested the practices that week. 2 came back with small, believable results: a return deposit, a reconnected client. Those micro-stories mattered more to me than the headline sale. I learned to guard the knowledge like a living instrument. I shared methods only with accountability. The code is not for spectacle. It can be misused when wielded without steadiness. I found myself saying, more and more, a loop that is both shield and compass. I am clear, clarity anchors me. I am clear, clarity anchors me. It kept me honest in negotiations and in quiet moments of temptation. Months passed. The house on the mountain felt like a patient body I had earned and learned to inhabit. My mornings became a sequence. Wake, breathe, 3-minute ritual, write. The crystal stayed on the desk. I taught a small group once, not to convert, but to demonstrate process. People asked for outcomes. I offered them practice and consequences. The work spread in a modest, credible way. One night, I found myself holding the crystal and thinking about the first light that appeared on my wall. The memory was crisp: the texture of the envelope, the coin, the lemon smell candle. The past and present overlapped like double exposure. I realized the real change was not the number in a bank, but the shape of my attention. I could choose states that produced different facts. That was the ethical charge. Zarak's final words returned, often, in small echoes. The visible comes from an enacted invisible. Use it with care. Be the steward. I had a choice now to become a guardian of a process, not a peddler of certainty. That felt like an obligation and a gift. Mini cliffhanger. Late one afternoon, a new light appeared at the edge of the crystal, a pattern I had not seen before. It pulsed once, twice, and then resolved into a simple instruction. I hesitated, and then reached for a pen. I set the crystal on the table and watched the new pattern steady itself like a tide finding its rhythm. The blue light made the dust in the air visible, tiny ships passing through a slow sea. I could feel the muscle under my thumb that had learned the ritual, the 3 breaths, the phrase, the envelope on the table for 1 minute. The new pattern asked for something smaller and stranger, a single sentence, a public posture, and a daily micro-gesture. I hesitated, then picked up the pen. The handwriting came like a wave I had only been waiting for. I wrote 3 lines, and each line altered how my body sat. The sentence read simply, I hold beginning, beginnings hold me. When I spoke it aloud, my chest shifted. The room inhaled with me. The crystal pulsed once, twice, and the light reformed as if approving a small administrative act. The sentence was not a slogan. It was a protocol. That night I tested it. Preparation, lamp dimmed, coffee cooling, breath long and counted. Action. I said the sentence 3 times. Felt the posture change, spine straightened, jaw softened, then I placed my hand on the blue stone and let the feeling of being at origin settle. Effect. A notification arrived 45 minutes later, a partial payment I had not expected, routed through an old account I had nearly closed. A small but concrete loosened knot. Reflection. Beginnings do not have to be dramatic. They are simple gestures that tilt momentum. Soon a client asked me to rework a proposal I had abandoned. They offered terms that made the project viable. The frame had shifted. Mini cliffhanger. What that little sentence made possible would ask more of me than money. It would ask presence. Weeks passed, and I turned that single sentence into 3 practical forms, as Zarak had taught me to do. A private loop, a spoken declaration for when action must be taken, and a micro-ritual for daily anchoring. My private loop became, I am the doorway, doors arrive. When anxiety pressed at night, I whispered it and felt the quality of my attention recalibrate. My spoken declaration, used before calls and contracts, was, I speak the beginning, the world replies. My micro-ritual shrank to 20 breaths beside the window, palms over the crystal, eyes tracking the light until the feeling felt old and trustworthy. Each form had texture, breath, posture, the taste of air, and each produced small, verifiable replies. Once, an old supplier who had ghosted me for months returned their invoice. Preparation. I had held the doorway sentence for 3 mornings. Action. I called and used the spoken declaration, not asking but stating what we would do next. Effect. The supplier apologized and released a backlog that cleared a month of cash flow. Reflection. The line between negotiation and enactment is often a single posture. Mini cliffhanger. The more visible the result, the more the world leaned toward testing me. I learned to carry boundaries with the same tenderness as I carried the crystal. The key of transmutation is not a tool for grabbing outcomes from others. It is a tuning fork for the posture I bring to the table. When Eduardo called with concern, I met him with the doorway sentence rather than argument. His voice, always precise, loosened into curiosity. He began to ask for evidence instead of verdict. In another case, Marta from the neighborhood came by with a small problem, a community center deposit that had been held up. I taught her the 3 breaths beside her mailbox, told her to speak the spoken declaration with the manager as if it were already resolved. 2 days later, the deposit was returned. She cried because the relief was practical and humane. These were not miracles. They were restructurings, small rewrites of protocol that changed transactions into conversations. Mini cliffhanger. I felt that same pressure on my temple Zarak had used months before. The pattern spelled a simple protocol for scaling. Prepare, fix form, move feeling into memory, release into action, but with a specific caveat: protect the conduit. If attention becomes an extractive industry, the field resists. The instruction asked for stewardship, a small governance of who receives and why. I wrote it down and underlined the word stewardship until the ink bled. I began to practice governance. Before sharing a technique, I asked 3 questions. Will this repair? Will this preserve integrity? Will the person be accountable? If the answer was no, I guided toward other tools. The blue crystal became less an idol and more an audit. It reminded me that phrases can be weapons as well as bridges. The posture clear, steady, generous was the real protection. Mini cliffhanger. Stewardship would ask a new decision to teach selectively, to keep some portals closed. Months of disciplined practice changed the architecture of my days. My inbox cooled, my calendar built around states rather than urgencies. I said no more often than I had in years. Saying no had a sound of flat quiet in the mouth, a hand on the chest, and the world rearranged with an economy I had not known existed. The sale of the company had been a necessary correction. Now I found myself stewarding time, not only money. Friends noticed. Eduardo asked fewer questions and brought more evidence than anxiety. My sister called less about worry and more about a song she heard on an old radio. She told me that she felt younger on the phone. Those shifts were the work of posture as much as any practical transaction. I do not promise that every practice yields a headline miracle. I promise precision and responsibility. When I teach, I insist on experiments with verifiable signs. That insistence protects both the learner and the practice. The field is precise. It will answer to posture. If posture slants toward compulsion, the field slants back. Mini cliffhanger. Then the light behind the crystal changed again, quieter, like a door behind a door. Tonight, as dusk pulls the valley into indigo, I hold the crystal and the pen that first received the sentence. I feel grateful and a little dangerous in the way that truth can be dangerous when it is useful. I trace the new lines in the stone, and I say aloud the loops that have become the grammar of my days. I am the doorway. Doors arrive. I hold beginning. Beginnings hold me. I speak the beginning. The world replies. These are not empty chants. They are habits of attention. They shift the axis of decision inside the body. They are small rituals you can try. 3 counted breaths, the sentence inside the head, a minute of anchored posture with palms on a stone or a clean surface. Test gently. Record what changes. Be accountable. If you stayed with me this far, thank you. This channel is new, and this work is humbling. If this story lands, leave a comment with your city and country. I read them. Subscribe to follow these experiments. The next portal I will explore is about relationships and obligation, how to hold presence without consuming others' wills. I will tell you what the crystal pulsed tonight and what I wrote next. Mini cliffhanger. The next pattern asked for a different courage, not to create wealth, but to create repair. I close with a short instruction you can carry. Prepare the senses, fix a simple form, enter the feeling as memory, release and return. Keep the ritual small so it becomes true. Repeat the loop that opens your day. My final loop for now, the one that steadies me before any large choice. I open the door brings what I need. I open the door brings what I need. Hold that with care. The visible follows the enacted and visible. Steward what you learn. The portal waits.